I've been building AE86s for over a decade now. I've met some incredible people all over the United States, literally from coast to coast. I have seen so many AE86s and made some incredible connections. But out of the hundreds, if not thousands of cars I've seen, I can count on one hand how many cars actually had working air conditioning. And so for the last several years, I have sourced every bit of AE86 AC components that I could to put in one of my cars, and to be able to make the information publicly available to all AE86 enthusiasts of how to get air conditioning working in your car. I do want to preface this with my car is Beams 3SG powered, so there is some stuff that isn't going to directly apply to 4AG powered Corollas, and there is some stuff that I'm not going to specifically cover just because I don't have a 4AG powered Corolla to mess with. But most of the information is going to be universally applicable. There's only a small part that is Beam specific, even a little bit that's there for it is fairly universal. That said, if you have more questions about something, put it in the comments below. I'll make sure to capture any of that discussion that happens, the clarifications, and put it in the video description so that way this stays continuously updated with the most information possible for the AC system. Let's get into it. The good news about the AE86 AC HVAC system, and it's very simple. A lot of the AC systems for Toyotas back in this era were a dealer installed accessory. The problem with that is there's a lot of discontinued parts. So I wanted to cover the parts that I had to source that are discontinued, as well as the parts I was able to buy new. When I first started filming this video, like 3 years ago and 2 houses ago, I'm literally my 3rd house since I started this video, the evaporator was available new. It's no longer available new. I'll put the part number in the video description just so you can have it. It may pop up again. But other parts like the condenser and the receiver dryer are still available new for you to purchase. But pretty much all the other AC system parts are not available new unless they were universal. So the hard lines, those are all discontinued. The evaporator is discontinued. The HVAC case, all the interior parts are discontinued. And so a lot of this is going to be fixing the old stuff to make it better and make it work. And then, doing our best to try and purchase new parts when available. Let's start by restoring the HVAC cases, the blower motor assembly case, the actual condenser case, and then the temperature control case. These are the 3 main components that are under the dash. This is the evaporator box. This has the air conditioning evaporator in it. This is the blower motor, and then this is the temperature and directional blend door system. So this is where we got the heater core. I've already started refurbishing these, and so you can probably see that this weather seal, this seal here looks pretty new. That's because that's been replaced. This is one of the common things that fails on these. I think why people think the air conditioning on these, when they do work, really isn't that great is because, well, a lot of these seals have deteriorated or fallen apart. There are a couple of different thicknesses for the seals. So like this, I think this is gonna be a 3/8 wide. What I did is I actually just went to Home Depot and I grabbed some of this stuff. This is 3/8 inch wide and like 5/16 inch thick. It was like $3 for a roll of this weather seal at Home Depot or at a local hardware store, compared to when you buy the stuff that's actually branded for automotive, it's like $15. It's essentially the same stuff, it's just a foam tape. It's all meant for air conditioning systems, it's all meant to seal this kind of stuff. So I wasn't super worried about this using the automotive branded stuff versus the stuff meant for like a home use. The seal for the evaporator case is a little different. It's a lot thicker, so it's not 3/8 inch. What I did for this is I went and I picked up a roll of 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch because it's pretty thick this way as well as pretty deep, so larger than the 3/8 that I already put on. Now we're gonna go and put this on. To scrape off the old stuff, I just use a plastic razor blade. That way it doesn't mar the case, and we were able to scrape most of it off, and then use some brake clean or another kind of aerosol spray or cleaner that doesn't leave a residue on the surface. That way, when you put the new stuff on, it's gonna stick. I think technically you really should use like rubbing alcohol, but I don't have any of that. All right, then once you're satisfied with your cleanliness of it, then you'll just grab your new weather stripping and run it along it. This was a really cheap one I bought, so hopefully it doesn't come apart. Pro tip, don't use cheap tape from Amazon. That's what this is, and it was pretty miserable to be able to get the paper backing off of it. And it looks like I could have even gone thicker with this. This is 1/2 inch and could have gone like, maybe not quite 3/4, but definitely more than 1/2 inch. Once you reach the end of your spot, I just grab a razor blade, chop it. One of the things I did that I didn't mention or show with the HVAC case is that a lot of those hinges to be able to move everything and move all the doors, they can get a little rusty, a little cruddy. So what I did was I cleaned them up as the best I could with just a wire brush or some soap and water and cleaned them. And then I used some PB Blaster, WD-40, whatever to try and lubricate them. Some was metal on metal, some was metal on plastic. I try to do my best to lubricate it because everything's gonna move as freely as possible. Next, let's look at like the HVAC controls, which also involves some of the heating elements. So not exactly air conditioning related, but still a pretty common problem with 86s. None of the AE86 that I've owned have ever had working heat, and that's because of one pretty much common problem. First, you get these heater valves, right? That's what this guy is. As you go to actuate the HVAC from inside the car, it goes to move a cable, which hooks onto this guy. This is the heater valve that bolts onto the firewall. So what happens over time is this gets corrosion and it doesn't want to move. And so what ends up happening is all the force from trying to move this heater valve, well, you get this blue cable, that's what goes to the heater valve, and it puts all the force on this plastic housing and cracks it like right here, and sometimes in other places over here. And every single AE86 I've owned has been cracked here on the HVAC controls. So what we're gonna try and do here is plastic weld it back together to give it some strength back and fix what's broken there and hopefully prevent any damage in the future. I've already done a test fix on one of my spares. You can see it looks kind of gross there, but what we did is we added some staples, some hot staples from this guy, that's the plastic welder, and then we added some mesh and then grabbed some ABS plastic here and melted it in place, which is why it's all like white and black and kind of weird looking. That's what we're gonna do on the other one and hopefully get it fixed so there's no more problems, because this one you see it even broke off this whole corner where those cables attach to. Hopefully this works out. I'm gonna lay this mesh here on top of it and hopefully that's gonna work. What I'm trying to do with the mesh is distribute the load over a larger area so that hopefully it'll stay. And we're on to mounting the AC condenser. The condenser is in the front of the vehicle, the evaporator is inside of the vehicle. Luckily, this condenser was available new for me. This is a original Denso, and so I was able to get the condenser. Now, the one thing that you can't get, or at least I couldn't get, was the little rubber mounts where it bolts onto the car. I found some in just a random box of parts I had, luckily, but if you need those, good luck. You've got two different sizes. The top ones are larger diameter hole, and the bottom ones, it's a little harder to see, but they're a little smaller. On this, they don't really like to mount in there, but I think they're more there as a stabilizer, and the upper mount's actually what hold it steady. So these ones had the bolts in them. I've got the whole front end of this car apart to make it easier to see. The upper mounts are gonna go here on either side of the upper radiator support. So we've got one on this side and one on the other side. The lowers are much, much harder to see. Right here, there's a hole, and that hole is threaded on the other side, so you don't need a nut, whereas the upper ones you need a nut. This one,
So this one you got a threaded spot on both sides, and then yeah, that's where those will go. Just to give you a little better view, that's all the way down right in here. Underneath the headlight, it's like a straight shot down. That's the part number, 477-0142. Yes, original Denso. This is an OEM part. That's just the Denso direct part and not like the Toyota part number. To install this in the vehicle, it's pretty straightforward. You're just gonna have to fit it down in there. You don't actually have to pull the bumper. You might on a USDM bumper. You know, like I said, I've got this all torn apart to make it easier for you to see. I'm gonna put it in kind of from the bottom here to snake it up and in, or if you've got the radiator out, you can snake it in from behind, but I'm gonna snake it up from the bottom here. On the condenser itself, we've got these little brackets that are threaded for the AC lines to bolt onto. They're a pretty standard thread pitch for pretty much any Toyota, the smaller Toyota bolt. All of the hardware you see me using to install this comes from Flows, and they have a kit for Toyotas, which makes it really great. Flows.ie. They've got a great bolt kit, makes stuff like this super simple.
This is one of the other bits that's kind of hard to get. This is the receiver dryer bracket. It's discontinued. You can probably make something that'll work, but I was able to find one used off of a wrecked car, so now I'm gonna be able to put the new receiver dryer in this bracket. It's a clamp style, so once we put it in here, we'll clamp these two bits together, and then it'll be tight on the receiver dryer. This bracket is gonna mount here and here. So you're just gonna get a couple of M5 by 0.8 at 35mm length screws, and that's gonna go through both of these spots to mount the bracket. The bracket also comes apart, which is kind of nice. I was able to separate it out. That makes it easier for mounting it because headlight bracket and lev and stuff is in the way, and I didn't want to have to pull the condenser back out. For Trueno, for pop-up headlight, you might not have to do that. In and out. In is gonna be from the condenser and out's going to be to the evaporator, so just make sure you've got the inside over here, and then we're just going to pinch this back together to clamp it. There we go. That's installed. You've also got this as a part of the bracket, which allows you to bolt this line on right here. So I'm just going to tighten that down real quick. And now we can put the headlight back on. Look at that, it ends up mostly hidden behind the headlight, and then once we put the grill on, it'll be pretty much all hidden. Now if I was a smart man, I would have sent the bracket out to have it sandblasted and powder coated, but I'm not always a smart man, so that's just gonna be how it is. I'm not hooking the lines up yet, because I want to flush all the lines out before I hook them up. They are old and ancient, so we'll do that in a little bit. The next step I'm gonna do in preparing the system to be installed and all that stuff on the car is I've gotta clean it. So I wasn't able to get a new evaporator. I tried to order one, but they're discontinued or on intergalactic back order. So instead what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clean and flush one of the original ones I have from the cars I've pulled apart. And then I'm also gonna flush out all the AC lines. You see, R12 refrigerant systems or AC systems, like what was original on the AE86, uses a different type of oil and a different type of refrigerant. And if you mix the old oil with the oil from the new Beams AC compressor, which uses R134A type refrigerant, bad stuff will happen. So one, we need to flush out all the old oil, which just ends up, you know, filming around all in the inside of the lines and everything. But also, I don't know if the cars that I pulled these AC lines off of ever had a compressor failure. And that's another thing. If you get a compressor failure, you're supposed to flush out all the lines. That way you don't get metal debris and junk that's gonna keep causing problems. This is just a dish soap and water bucket. We're gonna put our filthy evaporator in there. I guess the nice thing about this is that the hose ends end up top. So that kind of helps prevent you from filling this with water. Now we'll just kind of let that sit and soak, and we'll move it around a little bit, try and agitate the water to help get a bunch of the junk out of in between the fins. I honestly don't know how well this is going to work, so we'll see what the water looks like in a bit, because it was nice, and oh, I can still put a bunch more water in there. Let me do that. So the idea here is that we're soaking the evaporator to try and free up or get rid of any dirt and grime and things that have built up on the fins over the years. So that way when we put it back in, it's going to be a little bit cleaner, so it'll be more efficient at cooling the air when the AC is on. At least that's the idea. How effective it's going to be? Because really you probably need to agitate this water quite a bit to get it to really sling some dirt out of the fins and stuff. I don't know if there's really a good way to do that, but I'm gonna do my best. I've got the water level right up to the top of the evaporator here, so hopefully we're able to get a bunch of junk out of it. It's only been sitting here for a few minutes, and that water is already filthy. I think it's doing something. We're done soaking this thing, and you know, it actually turned out pretty clean. I know that looks really gross right now, but then get a flashlight on it, you go, oh, it's honestly not too bad in there. That's pretty good. If you look at the water, ended up just a little murky. So I guess it wasn't as dirty as I thought. I think we should be good to let this air dry, and then we'll flush it, and should be good to go in the car. Right, with the evaporator cleaned-ish, we're gonna work on flushing the system. You're gonna flush using something like this. This is just a generic auto parts store flush kit. This is a rental tool, so this is rented from O'Reilly Auto Parts. All that you're gonna do is you're gonna fill this with flush fluid, or solvent like this, and this is a very strong solvent. You're gonna fill it up based on the maximum capacity on the tool. Then you hook this side up to shop air, and then this side, it's just got a nozzle, boonk. You're gonna pump that into your AC line. For example, I've got this guy, it's just gonna go like this and just psh, psh, psh. All right, so that's what we're gonna do. One of the things that I didn't film was replacing this guy. This is the TXV valve. It threads, it's inside of the HVAC case, and it goes, installs right here on the evaporator. One thing you gotta make sure of is that when you replace it, the temp sensing bulb, or whatever it's called, goes in this little sleeve over here. But it's really easy. Undo it from here, and replace it. This is a really standard part, used with probably hundreds of different models of vehicles in the 80s and 90s. So it's a readily available part. So when you do go and replace everything and flush all the system out, you do need to remove this, otherwise it's not gonna flush properly, and you need to remove it so that way you don't have contamination from the R12 and the old style of oil lubrication in the system. One part that isn't replaceable exactly is this line right here. I haven't made any hard lines for AC before, so I'm not sure what all is involved with it. I just know that this is kind of a weird AC line that goes from here over here, has this weird threaded fitting on it for your pressure sensor, and then it goes out to the firewall to be able to attach to the line in the car. Now on to the next bit. When we're assembling these hoses, these lines, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take off the old O-rings, replace all of them with new ones that are meant for R134 and PAG oil, and then we're gonna lube them with PAG oil as we go together. Just dipping my pinky in the bottle of PAG oil here. It's got some UV dye on it, so that's why you see it's a little yellow in color. Now we're not gonna tighten everything all the way, not until we have all the lines hooked up with the condenser and the evaporator in, and then once we get everything kind of lined up, then we'll snug them down. But right now I've got that lubed up and we're good. Now we're gonna go ahead and get those HVAC boxes installed in the car.
You don't have to have your car torn as far apart as I do. I'm in the middle of doing a few other things, but this was just easier so you could see, as well as for me to do the other work that I have going on in this car. And make sure to position the evaporator drain in the right hole, because there are two down here, and then get the evaporator lines through the firewall. There we go.
I have all of the AC lines installed in the car at this point. Sorry, I don't have video of installing them, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you all the AC lines that you need to be able to have like a factory looking setup. You can always make these. Luckily, there's a bunch of tools to make them, but this is the factory lines that I sourced. The first is going to be this guy. This is your high pressure line that goes to the evaporator. That's number one. While we're looking at the evaporator, we'll also look at the other evaporator line, the low pressure line out of the evaporator down below. That big thick guy, that's line number 2. Now the bends aren't going to look the same for you as they do for me right here, because I had to bend them a little weird to get around some beam stuff and the JSP Fab oil catch can coolant overflow. But here, this is where we can get to line number 3. So you see this is the low pressure line that comes out of the evaporator. Then we've got a connection right here for a line that goes through that spot right there. The little oval cut out, both of the lines will go through there. Coming out of this spot, this is where we get to lines 4 and 5. High pressure line, you have this like big U-shaped line that goes up to the receiver dryer right here, okay? And then you've also got a little S-shaped line that goes from that directly into the condenser. That one's really a pain to install, but that would be line number, let's see, we're at 5. Moving along from there, let's look at line number 6, this guy. So here's our low pressure line as it comes through the car. Then it connects to this guy, which is right in front of everything. And here we've got our low pressure port. This has an R134 fitting on it. The high pressure port is over there under the strut tower brace. And the last hard line that I sourced to make this factory-ish attaches to the condenser right here. And what this does is this goes through that little oval cutout and then comes up right under here, right there. The bottom line that's connected, it comes up right there underneath the battery tray. I really wish this was easier to see. There you go, you can kind of see it, kind of the elbow down there. Those are all the AC lines. With the lines and everything all on, it's time to do another important piece of this, which is the retrofit fittings. You see, the AE86 came with R12 refrigerant in it, right? Each AC refrigerant type uses a different type of fitting. That way you don't cross-contaminate the system with different refrigerants at the same time. So we got to swap out the R12 fittings for R134A fittings. These lines came with these adapter fittings already installed on them, but I don't trust them, to be honest. I don't know what was in the system already. So I am putting on new fittings. That way I know I've got new seals and new valve stems and everything. Since I already have this fitting swapped out, I actually don't need to do this step, but normally on the line down there, you actually have to pull the Schrader valve out. So use a tool like this, and what that does, that allows me to go in and just untwist the valve, drop that guy out. So you would do that on the line, and then you would leave it out because the adapter fitting you'll be installing will be something like this, which already has a new valve in it. There we go, everything's hooked up. We know that's the right fitting. We're good to go. Now I'll do the other one. At this point, we're getting into the beam specific information. We're going to talk about compressors, which there is some discussion about the AE86 4AG compressor, so I guess hang on for that, right? But then also making lines and wiring in the beams compressor to work with a standalone ECU, not a factory ECU. So just remember that, standalone ECU, and with all the other factory AE86 components. When it comes to compressors, the thing that's important to know is that the original 4AG AC compressor is meant for R12 refrigerant. So with R12 refrigerant, it uses a different type of oil to lubricate the compressor as well as the entire system. Versus the Beams 3 SGE compressor uses R134A refrigerant, so the oil is different than the original. That's why we went through the whole hassle of flushing everything out. Well, now it's flushed out, we gotta refill it. Typically what you'll find with AC systems is there's two different specs for fluid level. You'll see entire system dry versus system wet. It's kind of weird. So the reason why there's two different specs is because the total system capacity when dry gets loaded into the AC compressor for the most part, all right? And so what you're doing is you're filling up not only the compressor amount, but every other component in the AC system also gets a light coating of oil as the system operates. That's normal, that's what's supposed to happen. When you replace one individual component, there is an oil spec for refilling after replacing that. That's a little weird. The problem is that you can't really find a total system spec for the Altezza. It's just hard because it's a Japanese car, there's just a whole lot of information. What I was able to find for the 4AG, however, the 4AG AE86 spec is actually really straightforward. Toyota in the 90s thought it was a great idea to publish some information about how to retrofit R134A into the AE86, other Corollas, the Cressida, whatever, and I was able to find a PDF of this guide. So I put that on my website, there's a link in the description. And pretty much what it means is that it gives us all the parts for like Schrader valves and other things that need to be replaced, O-rings, whatever, but the main thing is it tells us how much oil. So you have to flush the entire system out so the system is dry when you do an R134 retrofit to do it, proper. And so when you do that, the AE86 spec for oil is 100 grams, which is 100 milliliters. So if you are a 4AG AE86 person, 100 grams is what you're gonna put into your compressor. You make sure to drain your compressor of oil and refill with 100 grams of PAG 46 oil. Now the beams is a little different. So like what I was able to find was a sticker on an Altezza that said 100 grams plus or minus 50 grams, 25 grams, this sticker. And so I used that to kind of figure out, okay, how much oil should I put in this system? Because the spec is a little different. You can't just refill it with whatever came out of the compressor. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna shoot in the middle for like 118-ish grams, and we'll see what happens. If one of the things I noticed is after I filled the system with the correct amount of refrigerant and the pressures are too high, that I know I have too much oil and I just need to drain a little bit out of the compressor, re-go, then do it again. But if my pressures are good and I'm cooling good, I'm not gonna worry about it. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the compressor and adding oil to it. If you're looking at the bottom of your Beams 3SG AC compressor, you'll see there's a bolt right here on the back cover. That's gonna be your drain, and that's where you're gonna drain it to be able to measure it. I've already done that. Mine didn't ship complete full of oil. I wasn't really gonna trust that, so I drained it, and now I'll go measure out the new fluid to go in it, the new oil. The oil that you're gonna use is PAG 46, which should be the equivalent of ND8. So here we're gonna fill it up with this juicy stuff. Now, not all of it comes with this bright yellow dye in it. I got stuff with the dye, so that way it's noticeable if there is a leak. Okay. Now we're gonna add the oil to the low side, which is the larger port. This is a little over 100 milliliters, so we'll add another, 18 or so milliliters to this once it's all in. It's usually a good idea to turn it over a little bit by hand to make sure it's not totally locked up now that you put a bunch of oil in it. Of course, probably help if I pull there we go. It's gurgling at me.
So the idea behind turning it over by hand is to make sure that you don't totally liquid lock the compressor when you fire it the first time on the car, because then you'll destroy the compressor, and these are hard to find, beams, AC compressors. What you're gonna do to wire the compressor is this wire right here. This is normally we go to the 4AG compressor. So you still got the 4AG compressor, just go ahead and plug it in. But for the beams compressor, we're gonna splice into this wire. And because I'm using a standalone ECU, I need to wire it to here, which is the connector for the ECU to be able to trigger the fans once it sees that I'm requesting air conditioning on this. But I also need to wire it to the AC compressor, which I added this little connector here. Because the beams compressor has a 3-wire on it, I just need one of those 3, which is for the AC clutch. So we'll wire it into this connector here. This one, and this guy. Here it is all wired up. You can see I spliced in right here to a brown wire. Then I've got a T here, brown to the wiring harness for the Link ECU from Panic Made. And then here it is all plugged into the AC compressor down there. All I've got to do is make sure to enable my input for a 12-volt input for the Link ECU. So I'm gonna leave that disconnected right now. And then we'll start the engine and get the AC pumping.
One other thing you might run into with the wiring is the tach signal, because the AC control amplifier, whatever, needs a tachometer signal. That way it knows to engage and disengage the AC clutch. That's how it knows the engine is running. It's not going to engage the clutch if the engine isn't running at 0 RPM. So right down in here, see this wire that I've got tabbed in right here? That's the tach signal to the AC module there. And for this to work with the beams setup, you have to use something like this. This is a Dakota Digital tachometer box, and it converts the beams 3SGE low voltage signal to a high voltage signal that the tachometer can read. I have another video on my channel that talks about why that works and how that works. So click the link, I'll put it up here if you're curious about it. Essentially, you just need to have the same stock style signal for the stock AE86 AC controller to work. And so you need to have it stepped up using something like that Dakota Digital signal box, and then the AC works. Here's the fun part, making the custom AC lines. Luckily, pretty much all AC lines, at least for the automotive, are standardized for fittings and hose sizes and lines and all of that, so it makes it really easy to pick out what you need. This also includes the fittings that bolt onto the AC compressor. I bought the fittings for my compressor on Amazon. I'll put a link in the video description below so you can take a look at what I bought. Pretty much I based my hose sizes on those compressor fittings as well as the lines that were on the vehicle already, which were number 8 and number 10. The hose going from the steel hard line on the car that passes in front of the condenser, and then this hose then goes to the AC compressor, that's the low pressure line, which is the larger diameter number 10. I use a straight steel crimp fitting on one end and a 45-degree aluminum fitting on the other end where it goes to the compressor. Don't worry, I'll show the actual crimp process in a minute. For the high pressure line between the compressor and the condenser, I use the smaller number 8 hose with a steel straight fitting to attach it to the condenser hard line and an aluminum 45-degree fitting for the compressor. Now I match the type of metal of the crimp fitting to the type of metal that it was attaching to. This way it prevents galvanic corrosion or whatever from dissimilar metals. All right, now let's take a look at the actual tools that I bought to do this. To crimp the AC lines, I bought this tool on Amazon for 100 and some odd bucks. Along the top there are all those multicolored bands. Those are the different dies to use, based on the type and size of hose you're trying to crimp hose ends onto. And the big bit there, that's obviously the crimper. And it also comes with this guy to cut the hose, a nifty little charm, and some work gloves. Before we use the crimper, I measured out my soft line to 13¼ inches for the number 8 high pressure line and 30.5 inches for the larger number 10 low pressure line. The low pressure line could probably be as short as like 29 inches and still be okay. I was a little long, so I ended up using some zip ties to like tidy it up a little bit.
Once you've measured out your hose length, you're gonna use this cutter, get it lined up and just snip it. And that gives a nice, a pretty straight, nice cut. That way you're not gonna have any leaks once you crimp the fittings on.
To crimp the lines, you'll start by inserting the correct die for the size of fitting and hose into the crimping tool, and then pump the tool just a little bit to get the gap to close. You'll insert the hose all the way into the fitting until it covers a little sight hole in the base of the fitting. Slide this into the crimper about halfway through, and then pump away. You'll know when to stop, the tool bottoms out pretty much. Then repeat the process for all of the other fittings. Installing these lines was like a huge pain, so I don't really have footage of me installing them in the car. The only recommendation I have is start with the compressor fittings, because those have the 45-degree angle that needs to be clocked correctly for the lines to be where they need to be, and then tighten that down, and then route the line to be able to get the straight fittings to where they need to go, because the straight fittings don't care about clocking. You just tighten up the nuts and you're good to go. Now for the belts. There are some people who've made some belt tensioners for the Beams AC compressor, because when you remove the power steering pump, you remove the belt tensioner. But I'm gonna do something a little different. I'm gonna use what's called a stretch belt. This one's come out in the last, like, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, where instead of using a traditional tensioner, the serpentine belt itself is like a stretch to fit. So there's a special tool to install it and remove it, and this way it's kind of like, removes one thing from the equation. The only downside is they are like a one-time use belt. So once you install it and you remove it, that's it, it's done, you gotta buy a new one. But it's cheaper for me to buy a $30 belt than it is for me to spend 100 and some odd dollars on a tensioner and then another 15, 20 bucks on a belt. So let's take a look at the tool real quick. I bought this installer removal tool from Amazon. This one's from Lyle. There's two different sides, depending on if you are installing or if you are removing. There's a bunch of videos on how to use these. So if you're curious, you can go ahead and look one of those up, but I'm gonna go ahead and toss this belt on. And there we go. The belt I ended up using is a K040296SF. And I can honestly say this is a very, very tight fit. The install doesn't quite show how tight it is, and I tried two different belt sizes, but this is the one that has worked for me. I've kicked on the compressor, it's not squealing, so I know this is a good one. With everything now hooked up to the car, it's time to leak test the system. We're gonna do this by using a vacuum pump first, and then we'll charge it. I bought a vacuum pump and manifold gauge set for pretty cheap on Amazon. I think it was like 150 bucks. And what we do to leak check it with this setup is we get the valves all set correctly, so we're gonna pull a vacuum on the system. This does two things. One, it obviously vacuum tests it to make sure it'll seal under vacuum, but two, it also boils off all the moisture in the system. And moisture is important to get out of the air conditioning system since we had it apart. So what happens is when the AC runs and if we have moisture in it, it can actually freeze and cause the AC to not work. It's an important step of the air conditioning service process. To put the system under a vacuum, the first step is going to be to go to both of these valves and tighten them all the way. You're going to twist to the right. That is going to allow vacuum to flow from here into the AC system. So you'll do this one, and you'll do this guy. Next, on your gauge set, you're going to twist these all the way to open. Open that one, and open that one. Now we got full open system, and now we can kick on the vacuum pump. Here's the switch we're going to hit. We're going to let that run for about 30 minutes to an hour, so we pull a really nice strong vacuum. Then we're going to close some valves and let it sit overnight. We've waited our 1 hour. We're going to go ahead and close these. All right, and then we turn the vacuum pump off. The reason I closed the valves was so that we don't have vacuum bleeding back through the pump. So the closing those valves seals the system between the gauges and the AC system on the car. That way we got less opportunities or chances for a vacuum leak. Now we let it sit for 24 hours and we'll see what it shows. 24 hours is up, let's check the gauges. All right, I still see that it's holding the vacuum, so we're good to go. Now we can charge the AC system. I'm not gonna do a full charge on the system. First, we're gonna start with just a test charge. I'm gonna charge it up a little bit so it reads like 20 PSI on both, and we'll let that sit overnight again to make sure we test the system not only under vacuum, but also under pressure. For the test charge, I've just got a little can of Freon hooked up. We hooked it up where the vacuum pump was, and then I've got this little fitting here to be able to open the can. Open the can, I'm just gonna twist this guy down. So now we go ahead and open that. Sometimes it helps to shake the can a little bit to get it to charge through. It's kind of hard to see. The R134 is this gauge, that middle one there. And we're at about 25 PSI, so now we're gonna go ahead and close the valve. And then we're going to also close this valve. And we'll see what it looks like in the morning. Hopefully it's still holding pressure. After letting it sit overnight, it was still holding pressure, so I felt good to go to try start charging it, this is where things kind of get interesting. So this setup works okay with the manifold gauges, and then the yellow tube, which we had ran to the vacuum pump before, well, that's now running to a can, all right? And it works okay, but not great. I actually have 3 little cans to try and charge it. The reason why it only works like kinda okay is because technically to charge an AC system is based on the weight of the Freon, not just hoping that you get the right pressures. Don't get me wrong, the pressures are a big part of it, but they're not everything. So I'm just trying to get it charged up to where it works, and then later I'll probably take it to a shop to have them professionally evacuate and recharge it to make sure I get the right amount of Freon in the system. To charge it though, you're gonna hook up your can with this little adapter, right? You're gonna open that up, you're gonna come up to these valves, and you're going to keep the red one, the high side, closed, and you're going to open the low side. That's because this can doesn't make a whole lot of pressure, so what you're doing is you're hooking up to the low side, and then you start the engine, and you turn on the air conditioning, and with the air conditioning running, the low side will actually pull down to, the low side will actually pull down to like 30 PSI or even lower sometimes. And so as it pulls the low side down, the can has a higher pressure. So the can ends up being able to overcome that, and it gets sucked into the system, and you're charging the Freon essentially. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and start the car. Okay, so we've got the engine running right now. I was a little worried about ECT, but we're at 192 coolant temp. Okay, here's our temp gauge. And we're gonna go ahead and kick the AC on. I don't have the idle speed set up well on the ECU yet, so I have to manually control that with my foot. But you can see it slowly comes down. So now we're at 80 degrees, and it's definitely like 100 degrees outside, so it is pretty toasty out there. And now we're at 70 degrees. Yeah, this thing's coming down. We're doing good. This is great. We're gonna let it run and see how low it gets. It's been running for about 5+ minutes and hasn't gotten below 60 degrees. Definitely have to add some more Freon, but we know the system's working. Woo! The last topic is how the electronic controls work for both beams and for 4AG. We'll start with beams because it's a little more straightforward, and then we'll do the 4AG stuff. So you saw that when I wired in the beams AC compressor, what I did was I tapped in a wire to the AC compressor clutch circuit. What that does is that provides a 12-volt input to my standalone ECU. I have to configure it so the standalone ECU, whatever you use, Link, Adaptronic, Haltech, whatever, sees that 12-volt input and goes, oh, okay, I am requesting air conditioning, so what I need to do with that is I need to increase idle speed, and I need to command the cooling fans to full speed, whatever setting that is. It's pretty simple. Each ECU is going to be a little bit different, so you'll have to talk to your tuner about configuring that. And the 4AG is a little different. It's not that it's necessarily complicated, but it uses extra components. So the 4AG ECU and the AC amplifier, which is like the AC ECU, they work together, but not as smoothly. So the AC amplifier has idle up solenoids and some extra circuits and components that I don't have on my car to tell you how it works. But essentially, when you hit that button to command the AC on, one of the other things that the AC amplifier controls is a solenoid which increases air into the intake to be able to increase your idle speed. It works similar to an idler control valve. It bypasses air through the throttle plate from one side to the other to allow the engine speed to increase. The cooling fan on the 4AG is a mechanical cooling fan, so you don't have to worry about any of that. As long as you use the mechanical clutch fan, it doesn't matter. It's just gonna run full blast all the time pretty much. I did want to mention it looks like there is some sort of RPM adjustment for 4AG or 4A powered cars using all the stock systems on the AC amplifier, the little dial that says RPM, and you can twist it, and I think that can change your idle up speed for the AC, but I don't have a car running it, so I don't know for sure. That just seems like what it is. So that's the electronics in a nutshell. If you've made it all to the end of this video, I appreciate it, and I hope this was helpful for you in getting your AE86 air conditioning working so you can cruise in the streets in the middle of summer and be comfortable. If you found this extra useful, please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share, all that stuff. I also have channel memberships that have extra perks. Start as little as $3 a month, and makes a huge difference in the type of content that I can do. So this video took me 3+ years to put together all of this. If there are other things that you want to know and want to know how to do, the more people that do those sweet memberships, the more videos I can make with all kinds of cool systems, and the memberships kind of help decide that. So if you're interested in something, we got enough memberships that, hey, we want to see you do something like this, Devin, we want to understand this, request the content, and you guys get priority of what gets made. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.